I was at Time magazine for 15 years, and interestingly enough, for the last year, I was forbidden to write about Israel. Trump brings the idiom and the conventions of pro wrestling. Everybody knows a lot of it's not real. You can't fact check what's happening in a wrestling ring, it's theater.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Readiness Report with the Daily Maverick. I'm glad to be with you. Again, still coming to you from a very, very hot DC. I am speaking to somebody whom I heard was in New York, but every time I reach out to him, he's going to South Africa. When I go to South Africa, he's in New York. So I don't know where in the world Tony Karon is, but I'm just going to hand over to him so he can introduce himself to you. He's got a sterling resume, but I think he's going to blush if I tell you what a wonderful global editor he is. Al Jazeera, he does podcasts, he does all sorts of things. Tony, welcome.
How's it?
Ek is bly om met jou te praat.
Alweer. Ons
have a
praat
lot-
gereeld op WhatsApp, maar hier is this is live.
Yeah. For our English speakers, he just spoke Afrikaans. You know those that language that is apparently being erased in South Africa, and white Afrikaners have this refugee status in the United States because this beautiful language of theirs is not being respected. Their land is being taken. It's not true.
No, wait, you said this language of theirs. Afrikaans is a language that was invented by brown people.
But that's what they say. They say there's a white genocide and that's their language. And if you ask me, this is an African language,
Yes,
right? This is an
100%.
African language. It's our language and we speak it. It is beautiful. And you are in Cape Town now, Tony. What brings you to Cape Town? Apart from it being home.
Okay. Well, it's home. My wife has an art exhibition next month, so I'm here for that. But also, we are launching a show. My job. I'm the editorial manager of AJ Plus, which is the Al Jazeera social media platform. We only publish video on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. I think that's I might be forgetting.
Okay.
YouTube, of course. YouTube.
All right. And just a
YouTube.
disclaimer, I do freelance for Al Jazeera, presenting a program called Upfront. It's a great space for me professionally and also psychologically, because I'm seeing how a lot of our colleagues who are in certain newsrooms, especially in the Western media, a lot of them are traumatized by the stories that they want to tell, but feel they cannot tell, by the editorial angle of those newsrooms. And I read just a couple of days ago that an ABC anchor that's in Australia, she won her case after being unfairly dismissed for criticizing Israel. And every time we say this, there's an accusation that we are making it up, that it's not true. I know that it is true, having been in some of those newsrooms, the emails that come, the blackmail, the threats, even going as far as telling journalists that they can't like a particular post. And these are not always journalists who are opining, because I'm in the business of giving commentary and opinion, and I'm very, very clear about that. But even a journalist just telling you that there was a massacre or aid workers have been killed, or even using the word genocide, journalists are being threatened and some are losing their jobs over that kind of reportage. And Tony, there are things to say about the dominance of American foreign policy narratives in how the world is reflected. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, first, before I was at Jazeera, where I've been for the for the last 10 years, I was at Time magazine for 15 years. And interestingly enough, for the last year, I was at Time magazine. I was forbidden to write about Israel. Now, I'd never gotten anything wrong. The bosses knew that I knew more about that story pretty much than anybody there. So much so that, when the managing editor at the time was going to Israel for meetings with government leaders and so on, it would come to me for a briefing. But suddenly it was like, no, you're going to get me in trouble. Now, that's not for getting anything wrong. That's simply for not towing the line. Because what was happening at that time was that the magazine had a sort of ghost editor, shall we say, like somebody who was looking over the editor's shoulder. That person was Ron Dermer, who now is Netanyahu's, I don't know what he is. He's like the political, senior political aide or whatever. But, gets me of like, you're not taking the Israeli line, that's your problem. It's not like you got a fact wrong or, there was a sort of imbalance or whatever. None of the traditional things. It was just like, you're not taking the line. So best that we keep you off that story. But I think, absolutely, there's the Western media in general is very embedded, almost as a point of pride and principle in the corridors of power. That, I could say at Time Magazine, they really saw their role as explaining to the public the thinking of the people in power. That was their sense of what their mission was. So they prioritized what they called access. Access meaning you get an exclusive, and I'm putting my hand, the quote marks here are because the exclusive is something that somebody's told you. Now, in other words, you've been given, it's not like somebody let slip, you got them drunk and they blurted something out that they shouldn't have. They're coming to you knowing, okay, if you publish this first, you have an advantage over your competitors. And, this is the game here because everybody's getting the same information. You're getting this first. It's a get. It's not a get. You're just being spun. You're being spoon-fed. But that's the whole, how did they end up with the Iraq war? How did they end up? The New York Times apology is literally, oh, sorry, we believed what we were told. You call yourselves journalists? Like, come on. Like, but there's the sense of the media, I think it's since the Cold War. The media feels like it's loyal. It has a national security function. So it's basically liable to, the New York Times has never really understood what it got wrong about Iraq. It wasn't just a question of, are there mass destruction weapons or not? Does Saddam Hussein have a few VX gas missile shells left over from the 1980s? The real issue there was that they had bought the idea that if Saddam had any unconventional weapons, which he had because the US helped him get them in the 1980s when he was fighting with Iran, but it's the idea of if Saddam had any of these weapons, then there's no question that you have to go to war. Now, France and Germany actually believed that he had the weapons the US said he had, but still strenuously opposed the war because they were like, this is insane to go and invade and occupy, the most powerful country in the Arab world. And you can see the consequences ever since. But guess what? 2 weeks ago, the New York Times is doing exactly the same thing about Iran's supposed nuclear weapons program. They're even using the term in their headlines, even though there is no nuclear weapons program, according to even the CIA. It's like,
and yet, you have some pockets of media. I mean, I saw that wonderfully put together collage, as it were, of Benjamin Netanyahu's claim about Iran being close to releasing a nuclear weapon. And I saw the year that he started saying that, 1995. I was in grade 11 at Potchefstroom Girls High. I became a journalism intern, and he was still saying that when I was on Kaya FM as now a presenter, this is what we were reporting. I'm a 47-year-old semi-retired journalist with some gray hair underneath my nice weave. And he's still saying that. So they put together all his comments that Iran is months away from releasing putting together a nuclear weapon, a year away, 3 months away. He just keeps changing the goalposts. And a lot of commentators are just falling for it. But I guess for me, the bigger picture, what was the end game and why did the US enter the space? And the failure to reflect this for what it is. It's a big question, many elements, but just your thoughts.
Ooh, that's a big one. That's a big one. Look, if we think about, taking the elements of this, like think about what Iran is doing and isn't doing. Iran has a nuclear program. It's not a nuclear weapons program, but it has very consciously used whatever space a civilian nuclear energy program gives you to create the capacity to build a nuclear weapon. They call it threshold status. So basically, you develop and this is all allowed under the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. You can build uranium enrichment facilities. You can't enrich to 90%, which is what you need for a weapon. But essentially, threshold status means that you bring the possibility of building a nuclear weapon closer and closer. You shorten the timeline it would take you if you chose to do that. All of the CIA, all of the intelligence services, the IAEA, etc., have said Iran hasn't taken this decision. They haven't done this. But they clearly use the fact that they could do it to bring the Americans to the table. That's what Obama's JCPOA, the 2015 deal, was. It was like, okay, Iran's actually done something very, very innovative here diplomatically. It has gotten some of the gains, because, basically you don't get taken seriously in geopolitics unless you have nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons are the ultimate deterrent. Nobody can knock you over. Gaddafi gives up his nuclear weapons, he's gone. Saddam Hussein gives up his nuclear program, he's gone. Kim Jong-il, he's still there, because nobody's going to mess with North Korea because they have nuclear weapons. So, in that sort of schema, the idea is you only get taken seriously by the big players. If you have nuclear weapons, well, Iran managed to get the others to take it seriously, to sit down at the table with the US, with Britain, France, Germany, and Russia, based on the fact that they could build a nuclear weapon. That was enough to get others to the table. Of course, Trump comes in. Now, okay, Trump comes in. The pressure is coming from the Israelis. The Israelis never accepted Obama's nuclear deal. At least the Israeli leadership didn't. The Israeli intelligence community was quite happy with it. Even the military, they knew that Iran didn't represent an existential threat to Israel. Look, if you have a nuclear weapon, why would Iran think about building a nuclear weapon? To protect and to ensure the survival of its regime. The Iranian thinking about a nuclear weapon begins in the Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 88, where the Iraqis are bombing Tehran, they are using chemical weapons, and they have a secret nuclear program that's not so secret. Everybody kind of knows about it. So the Iranians consider, should we do this? Eventually in 2000, there's a fatwa from Ayatollah Khamenei, the leader, saying, no, don't do this. And of course, yeah. But for the Israelis, dangling an Iran threat, you could see this so clearly in the Obama era. Obama comes in and he's like, right, what are we going to do to kind of get this Palestinian state thing on the road? Like we've been, circling around this, messing around, whatever. We need to get this done. And Netanyahu is like, sorry, what? No, we have to talk about Iran, as you say, is how many weeks away from. So basically, he changes the subject from the Palestinians whenever, this happens. I mean, even now, think about what's happened in the last 12 days, as Trump calls it. How many Palestinian children were killed in Gaza during the 12 days that the world's media was focused on Iran? So, it's this everlasting thing. Is it going to last still? I don't know. But yes, I mean, basically, Trump came in and was persuaded that the Obama nuclear deal was defective, even though Iran was keeping to it. It was keeping its end of the deal. He's like, well, this is Obama's deal, tears it up. And that's what, that's when Iran starts enriching to 60%, showing, hey, we can get in closer and closer, come back to the table. But, the Israelis desperately wanting Trump to get, to fight their war for them.
Yeah. And did he really? I mean, here they are now. It's so comical. Well, a tragic comedy, really, because, everyone is flexing. Iran is saying, no, you didn't bring us to our knees. And Trump and Hegseth and them, they're claiming that the impact of the US's involvement was so complete, so devastating for Iran. And I'm thinking, I was watching their joint press conference, and I'm thinking, what is this about? Are we with little children who are standing there fighting with the media, lashing at everyone who says, well, your involvement was not as damaging to Iran. And the focus becomes that upmanship, that we did a great job, we destroyed them, versus you didn't do it. The substantive issues are missing here about what this reflects, about the geopolitics, what happens next, how do we rebuild, how do we recover from that, what do we do with Palestine? Those substantive issues have now been subverted in favor of a childish conversation that is about a competition. But let me go here with this. For the first time a couple of days ago, well, at least my observation, Trump seemed annoyed with Israel. And it was in those impromptu comments as he was heading to NATO where he says, I'm really unhappy with Israel. And then he has to kind of add the obligatory with Iran too, so that he doesn't lose favor. But to be honest, if you know Trump and you've been following him, he was quite annoyed. He was pissed off. He was angry with Netanyahu. And he eventually said, you've got two countries who've been fighting for so long, they don't know what the F they are doing. I wonder if we can make a distinction between Trump as the president of the United States who has to or feel he has to follow a particular policy and take particular posture in relation to Iran, and Trump's instincts when it comes to this particular situation. It sounds as if he just wants them to stop the bombs, Netanyahu to just listen. This is unnecessary. That's his impulse, but he's not doing it because he's trapped by U.S. foreign policy, or am I being too kind to him?
No. I think Trump has torn up. I mean, what we have to understand here is the Cold War era national security state. The process by which the U.S. was making all its geopolitical decisions is gone, right? Trump is like this. None of this matters anymore. His head of intelligence says, "Oh, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons program." He's like, I don't believe her. It's like, who do you believe? So where, you're taking your institutional structure. They called it the process, the policy process, where the National Security Administration weighs in, and the FBI, the CIA weighs in, and military intelligence weighs in, and State Department intelligence weighs in, and everybody's, there's a big process conversation. That's all gone. Trump politically, I think, really interestingly, is a product of an America that there was this great writer, Neil Postman, who wrote in the mid-'80s a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And it was basically about how television as a format actually precludes serious public conversation. And that the US was basically going down a path where everything is essentially entertainment. And it just gets more and more like that. You think, even pre-Trump, like Trump's just the extreme version of this. Trump brings the idiom and the conventions of wrestling. Pro wrestling. Everybody knows a lot of it's not real. You can't fact check what's happening in a wrestling ring. It's theater. Trump brings that into politics. When he first runs, people are like, oh yeah, he can't be serious. And it's like, well, guess what? Your culture has evolved in this way that allows this kind of thing. So, White House press conferences, what are they? Are they real journalism? Are they real people asking serious questions? No, it's a performance. It's like somebody getting up there to, defend. It's like that game you used to play in gym class where they throw things dodgeball. It's nonsense. It's amusing, but it's not serious. So basically, I think Trump, he maybe has some sense of like, okay, he wants to get the Nobel Peace Prize, and he wants to show that he can solve problems. Like, I'm going to solve Ukraine in a day, and Gaza gone, whatever. And it's like, none of this is going to happen.
It does. It's
but he wants the
complicated.
theatrics, but he doesn't want to get sucked into it. Clearly, Trump's already said, I don't need a nuclear deal with Iran now because I destroyed their program. Move on. Like, let's go. None of that happened. At some point he said, all caps, unconditional surrender. So what is that? What does that even mean? It's like, obviously, that's not going to happen. But no war since 1945 has ended with unconditional surrender or even unambiguous victory. In fact, the US has lost all its wars pretty much since then.
Yeah. It's interesting to watch what's happening in Trump's space. And one just kind of wants to bring out the popcorn and just watch, whether it's Fox News or I can never get the Marjorie Taylor, MTG, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene. I never thought I'd ever find myself agreeing with her. Tucker Carlson, they're just going at each other. Do you think they've signaled to Trump? What does Trump's base want in relation to the US and its military in different corners of the world? But in answering that, keeping in mind the identity of the United States, the myth of the United States. We are a great nation, and they base that on military and economic might, bringing everybody to their knees in reverence to the United States. But it sounds as if many in the base don't want the US at war.
Okay, couple of things. One is that we need to understand that Trump represents a coalition. It's not a single movement. So basically, in that coalition, you have everybody from, white, mostly kind of working class or lower middle class nationalists, white nationalists, MAGA, that's your Steve Bannons, that's your Miller, Stephen Miller, your let's get rid of all immigrants and, great replacement theory and all of this kind of stuff. So that's a lot of the voters, right? Then you have your tech bros, your Elon Musks, etc. They don't really care much about all of that stuff, but they want they want the state to have no control over what they do, although they do want a lot of state contracts, and they also want taxes. They want to get as much money out of the state as possible. You have hawks, like old Cold War hawks, who would love to see the US invade and occupy everything. Marco Rubio probably personifies that tendency. There's lots of subgroups within that. There's kind of trade, like the nationalists, trade nationalists who, it doesn't actually suit Elon Musk to have a lot of tariffs on things that his products might need, etc. So there's a lot of competing elements there, and who's got Trump's ear? When he does all the anti-migrant stuff, and then the agriculture secretary says, "Hey, you know what? You need to lift." He's like, "Fine, I'll lift that." And then a few days later, it's like Miller goes mad at him, and he kind of comes back and switches back. So you can see what's going on here. There's a lot of different elements to that. Where was I going with this?
We're talking about the base and where they stand on this, and you are basically saying it's not a monolith, right?
So a second thing that's really interesting to remember about recent US history: how does Barack Obama become president when Hillary Clinton is like the heir apparent, right? She's tapped in 2008. What's the key point that he differentiates himself from her with? Against the Iraq War. I oppose the Iraq War. Hillary's deep in all of that. The Democratic Party, he runs literally as an anti-war candidate and he wins, right? And he pushes the establishment aside. 2016, Jeb Bush is the heir apparent in the Republican Party. Trump comes along. What's his key point of differentiation with Jeb Bush? You lot went and did the stupid war in Iraq. I always said that was stupid. No, I'm not going to do any more of these wars. And he wins. So there's actually a very strong feeling in both parties among the voters of not wanting imperial wars. I think that, I think Trump knows that. I think he's trying to back out of this now as quickly as he can.
Let's talk about what's happening in New York, right? And, when Barack Obama became president, Kenyans were rising, saying he's one of us. So I see in South Africa, we're doing the same because there is some connection to Mamdani. I'm talking about Zohran Mamdani, of course, who won the Democratic nomination for New York mayor. He's a Muslim. He embraces socialist policies. He's progressive. He got the support of some formidable voices, including an opponent who's Jewish. And so that is the kind of beautiful world that I want to live in, to see Jewish, Muslim, Black, brown, white people embracing ideas. But I see even in New York, you've got a very toxic, I think, right-wingism coming in and throwing the identity politics that he's Muslim. He's going to cancel every synagogue in New York. He's going to do this. That's what people are writing. And the billionaires are on his case as well. They're trying to find some legal loopholes and so on. It's about to get ugly, I think, in the build-up to November. So people must not be lethargic. But just going back to the South African connection, his father was a lecturer at UCT, right?
And UWC.
UWC, sorry. And he wrote for the Mail and Guardian as well. And I've been speaking to some of the students there who say, well, he was very vocal in trying to decolonize. He was pushed out of UCT and so on. But just that is enough for us to feel some sort of connection. But I don't want to be a provincialist. I want us to think globally around these ideas of solidarity, moving across geography, race, gender, in solidarity around certain ideas. But it's a big thing. It's a big development, regardless of what happens in November. I think there are lessons here for the Democrats as well around how you win elections. Your thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think what's interesting is Zohran comes along with an agenda that is basically, this city is unlivable for the people who built it. Like, and, we all know this. I mean, I come from, we're journalists. We're middle class. Our children can't really afford to live in a city that they grew up in. So it's not just working class people. It's like the affordability crisis is, really much across the board. And Zohran's campaign is about affordability. It's like public transport should be free. We need to basically make low cost housing available. We need to do something to help the food prices, et cetera, et cetera. And the billionaires don't like, you can't do any of that.
They're threatening to move out of New York if he wins.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, and what's their key, what's the word? Their key trope, like rallying trope. He's an anti-Semite. Like, what? No, because he supports Palestinian rights, right? Like, that makes him an anti-Semite. And it's like, for me, as a Jewish person who identifies with the universal rights of everybody and equality, and basically, I support the struggle for a free Palestine because that's the basic human thing. That's like, if you're going to say anybody who does the decent thing in the face of a genocide is an anti-Semite, well, you're saying, well, anti-Semitism, as you define it, is the decent thing because. It's not. That's not what anti-Semitism is, obviously. But they don't work with a real definition of anti-Semitism. They work with anybody who stands up to Israel, which they should do because it's a settler colonial apartheid state engaged in genocide, is guilty of genocide. So, but they think, okay, this is it. New York is the biggest Jewish city in the world, literally, right? It's got the biggest Jewish population in the world. You play that card, done and dusted. And guess what? It didn't work.
Yeah.
Like at least 1 in 5 Jewish New Yorkers voted for Zohran. There's a sharp generational divide where, you get thousands of Jewish people going and occupying Grand Central Station against the genocide. Like Israel is not how most young Jews, it's not part of their identity. They don't see themselves, they don't see Israel as representing them in any way. And so you've had this group of AIPAC, the Israel lobby group that basically runs candidates. So Cory Bush and Jamal Bowman, both very progressive Black Democrats, got primaried by AIPAC-funded candidates because of their stance on Israel. And basically that, this norm in the Democratic Party, like if you take a stand in support against genocide, in support of Palestinian rights, that's electoral suicide.
Yeah.
And that's what's been broken here, I think.
Yeah.
Right? In the most Jewish city in America, you can run unapologetically in support of Palestinian rights and against the genocide and win.
Yes.
Will the Democratic Party take the lesson?
Indeed. And even in the build-up in those debates when he was asked about Israel, a lot of us said, well, he's running for mayor of New York, not Tel Aviv. Let's just focus on what this is about for New Yorkers. But I wonder, you've got Bernie Sanders, you've got AOC, you've got the primaries next year. And I saw today, I woke up to a post by Bill Clinton, and now, congratulating Zohran. The establishment is kind of course, they've got to say something because, he did win the nomination. But whether or not they have the courage to read this for what it is. Are we overreacting in kind of thinking about the primaries and thinking about the future of the Democratic Party? What lessons should they be taking from this one? You touched on it, but I wonder whether they're just going to dismiss it as an anomaly. It just happened in New York. It doesn't reflect the rest of the country and so on.
Oh, they probably will. And worse than that, I suspect that they will support, if Cuomo decides to run as an independent, I suspect the Democratic Party establishment will get behind him. Remember, Bernie Sanders, they rallied against Bernie Sanders. This was exorcise the specter of democratic socialism is what's going on there. The Democratic Party is led by rich and mostly white people. And their politics is the politics of the rich. The Democrats are in the political wilderness because they couldn't ever understand how their policies were these managerial policies that basically did nothing for the majority of Americans who were getting poorer and poorer. Or, Obama when the 2008 financial crisis happens, he bails out the banks. Like 13 million Americans.
Socialism for the rich.
Exactly. Yeah. And 13 million Americans lose their homes. Those are people who voted for Trump. Like that, the policies, the kind of centrist nothingness of the Democrat, like there's no vision. What do they stand for? Like Obama was really great at looking like someone who had a vision. He was a beautiful speaker and he would have that look off into the distance. What were his policies? And then sort of Kamala Harris was like a weak imitator of that. And it's like, you have to be offering people something, that addresses their needs. Like Zohran wasn't running on identity politics. He was running on basically the rent is unaffordable. The groceries are too expensive. We're getting killed on childcare support, on transport, on things that working people actually need and care about. And so he, because a lot of people imagined his vote would come from the kind of lefty, middle, comfortable, mostly white parts of Brooklyn where, people are lean socialists, but, they're intellectuals. No, he got big chunks of the vote in a lot of the outer boroughs because he's talking about issues that a lot of establishment Democrats don't want to talk about.
Tony, we have to wrap up. I could speak to you all day. Thank you so much for giving us your time on the Readiness Report with the Daily Maverick. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we can talk all day with Tony Karon, but nobody has 48 hours in their day. That's the Readiness Report for this week. You can find us on the Daily Maverick and, of course, Spotify. Find us, download, listen, subscribe. We'd love for you to be a part of the Readiness Report.